May 15, we're here at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation in Rio de Janeiro for this second international seminar, Post-Abolition, History of Black Atlantic. And we have here with us Professor Thomas Holt from the University of Chicago, who's going to do a presentation about exactly what, Professor?
Well, about the idea actually of commemoration and events such as this. I was last year at the commemoration of the 100th anniversary, the centennial of abolition in Brazil. And that was a very different moment in the history of people in the Black Atlantic world, in the US and in Brazil. So now we're in yet a different moment, 30 years later. And so I will try to talk about how we might learn something from our reflections on that previous moment, and its complications, and some of the things that flowed from the abolition, both in the US and in Brazil.
You talked about the differences between Brazil at that time and now. Which are the main ones?
Well, you mean the time of
30 years ago.
30 years ago. Well, it seemed to me that there was a sense of, at least as a visitor, I found a sense of optimism and sense of progress, of breaking barriers and so forth at that time. I'm not an expert on contemporary Brazil, but I imagine they are probably, as in the United States, a sense that some problems still linger and need to be addressed. So.
And some of those problems, in spite of all differences, some of those problems are very similar in both countries. Huh? Police abuse and...
Yeah, very much so. Certainly in the United States, the kind of optimism that I think prevailed in, even with all the problems that even at that time in 1988, that we were coming off of a period of conservative politics in the United States, but there was a sense of an opening to a different era, which to some degree proved true, or at least eventually. I think that's and a different way of thinking about issues like race and racial problems, obviously socioeconomic problems, and also about the relations of people across what's come to be called the Black Atlantic world, which was, that was a moment in which we were beginning to, at least as historians, write about and think, I think, in very complex ways about that history and about that background. So those are some of the differences, I think.
Now, as a historian, would you consider yourself optimistic?
I'm always optimistic. I mean, basically, I recently did a long view history of African Americans, that is, Black Americans in the United States. And one of the things that was very clear is that it's a history in which there have been moments of great progress and then of retreat in some extent, or at least a stalling of progress. And that's been repeated from the earliest times, from the period of, say, or even before the American Revolution, the period of the Civil War and Reconstruction in the United States, period of the 1920s. So it's an old story. It's an old pattern, actually. So in that sense, each time the regression, in some sense, sort of sets the stage for the next move forward. So that's one way of maintaining my optimism.
Yeah. Now here in Brazil, since the turn of the millennium, we have seen, we have been part of a huge process of change. something that can be seen when you go to the university because of affirmative action. There are much more blacks in the university now. And some movements, especially movements led by women, based on valuing the phenotype, the heritage, the African heritage. Have you seen something of that here?
Well, I've not been in Brazil for about 20 years or so now, but I read about it, and it seems to me that it's a pattern that one finds in the United States and one finds elsewhere. One finds it in Europe as well. I mean, there's a kind of there's a deep similarity actually in the patterns that across diverse places that are otherwise very different, and yet also, of course, some differences between them.
Okay, Professor. Thank you very much, and I hope your presentation will be a great success.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
What follows is an interview with one of the main participants of this seminar, which is Professor Thomas Holt from the University of Chicago.